Hello guys, welcome back to the quantity surveying workshop and to another video. In today's video we are going to be treating how to measure for our laterite filling, our imported filling, and for this section we are going to be treating how to measure for our laterite filling in the foundation. So in the previous video we treated our backfilling to the foundation trench. So and you know what's the next process in building construction after you do your backfilling. You have to fill the partitions or the rooms with laterite. So before we move further, what is the unit of measuring laterite filling? In our standard method of measurement, laterite filling is under imported filling, and it is measured in meter cube. So mind you, there are two imported fillings that we deal in building construction: the laterite filling and the hardcore filling. So in this video we are going to be treating how to measure our laterite filling, and the unit is measured in meter cube. So it means that we're going to be needing the end-to-end dimensions of the rooms, both the length and the width, and then the thickness of 150 mm for the laterite. Those parameters is going to give us the volume of the laterite for the filling. So when measuring for the laterite filling, you have to take conversance with your drawings. Now if you look at this drawing, I want you to look at the walls that are inside the foundation. You can see that the walls, they've constructed this in such a way that the walls are only partitioning the main segment of the rooms. There are some times that even the walls partitioning the toilets will be found inside the foundation also, but this is quite different because the walls that are going to be partitioning small spaces like the toilets, the stores, they are not load-bearing walls. So those walls are going to come after you've casted your oversized concrete. Now take a look at this drawing. This is the drawing of the foundation trench and the blockwork inside the foundation. Now look at the drawing of our ground floor. Now as you can see, if you compare and contrast these two drawings, right, if you compare and contrast these two drawings, you would see that from here to this point is the same thing as from here to this point, right? Now what about this partition wall here? As you can see, it is not inside the foundation excavation. The walls that are only found in the foundation excavation are only the main walls. Now if I use my ruler and I put my ruler on this wall here, you can see that the wall is symmetrical to this one here, right? Similarly, this wall here, you can see that it is symmetrical to this wall here. However, this 150 mm blockwork that you are seeing here, partitioning the toilet, you can see it is not in the foundation trench. So the only blockwork that you are seeing in the foundation trench are the blockworks that are partitioning the main rooms. Like as you can see, this area here is the area of the bedroom, right? This area here is the area of the toilet and the entrance to the bedroom. So there are some cases where they would not give you the foundation drawing. You would have to use your ground floor plan to do your laterite filling, or to calculate for your laterite filling, because the partition walls that you are seeing like this on this drawing would be the same thing that would be in the foundation trench. However, things are different in this case, right? They've only selected specific blockworks in the ground floor, and that is what they've excavated into the ground. So when you are giving your foundation drawing, use the foundation drawing instead of the ground floor as what you would use to measure for your laterite. Because if you use your ground floor when they've given you your foundation drawing, you are going to under measure or over measure, because the ground floor is going to be having the partitions for the what? Toilet, for small spaces like toilets, stores, you know. And structurally, some of those walls are not bearing so much load. That is why, if you look at the skeleton of this building inside the foundation, it's for only the block work that is carrying what? Load. That is why you have to be what? Conversant with the drawing. So in this case, to measure for our laterite filling, we are going to be using the what? Foundation drawing, because that is what they've given us. So when you are giving the foundation drawing, it makes work easy for you. Now, if you look at this, how do we measure for our laterite filling? Like I said before, we measure the length, the width, and the thickness of the laterite filling as per the individual what? Rooms. Now, as you can see, this drawing kind of looks, you know, a bit confusing. Now, I have used red biro or red marker to outline the first room here, where we're going to be filling laterite. Now, if you look at this, I want you to use your inner eye to isolate all these drawings that you are seeing here. Your eye should just be on the block work, which is the yellow line that I have highlighted. So now, like I said, to measure for the laterite, we are going to be using the end-to-end dimensions of the what? Individual what? Rooms. That is why, if you look at this is our yellow line, which is the block work. We are going to be taking the end-to-end dimension of this block work as the length for this room, and then the end-to-end dimension from here to here as the what? Width of this room, or vice versa, depending on how you want it. This could be the length, this could be the width, right? So I have used my red biro to what? Outline the what? Partition. So now, how do we now determine our length and our width? As you can see, they've given us this point from this column point C to column point A as what? 4008, and it is what? Center to center dimension. So how do we get the end-to-end dimension for this what? Room? What you're going to be doing is you're going to be minusing half of the thickness of this what? Column. And we know that our column from the drawing is what? 230 by 230. So we're going to be minusing half of 230 from this side and half of 230 from this side. Whatever we have is going to give us the length, the end-to-end dimension for this what? Room. So we will not do the same thing for the what? Width, right? For the width, they've given us what? This dimension, and what? This dimension, as it was center to center dimension. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding them together, and then we'll be minusing what? Half of this column here and half of the thickness of this block work here. Whatever we have is going to give us what? The end-to-end dimension of this what? Room. With that, we have gotten our what? Length and our what? Width. We will now what? Book. So using this, what I'm going to do now is that I am going to what? Start the measurement for this room, and then we can now continue throughout the remaining. So before we start, let me count the number of rooms that we have here, because I mean, in the foundation drawing, they do not specify the names of these particular rooms, whether it is bedroom or toilet or kitchen. So we're going to be giving them number. So this is room 1, room 2, room 3. This long one here is what? Room 4, room 5, room 6, room 7, room 8, room 9, room 10, and what? Room 11. So there are going to be what? 11 what? Rooms that we are going to be what? Filling laterite into, before we now do our oversized concrete and start laying the blocks for the what? Ground floor, right? So we're going to be starting with what? This room, naming it as what? Room 1. So for room 1, we're going to be starting with this short side, and we're told that the center to center dimension is what? 4008. So we'll write length 4008. So we're going to be what? Lessing 2 by half of what? 230. which will cater for what? Half of this side and half of this side. So we'll now write less 2 by half of what? The column thickness, which is what? 230, and that is going to be equal to what? 230, and then we close. So 4008 minus 230 is equal to what? 3778. So it means that the in-to-in dimension from here to here is what? 3778. So we'll now determine the width. So for the width, as you can see, we are given how many dimensions? 3 dimensions. This, and what? This. So we want to determine the dimension from this center point to this what? Center point here. So we are going to be adding these 3 dimensions together. So 2545 plus what? 944 plus 1096. You add them together. And you're going to be having 4585. So it means that the dimension from this point here down to this point is what? 4585. So we're going to be lessing what? Half of the thickness of this column here and half of the thickness of our what? Block work here. So we know that the thickness of our block work and the thickness of the column is the same size, 230. So we are going to be doing the same thing. Less 2 by half of what? 230, and that is going to be equals to what? 230, and then we close. So 4585 minus 230 is equal to what? 4355. So it means that we have gotten our what? Length and our what? Width. So we'll now what? Book. We'll now book by what? Measuring our length and our width. So our length is what? Let's use the longer side, sorry. So our length will be what? 4.36. We're using this side as our length. Our width is what? 3.78. And then what's the thickness of our laterite? The thickness of our laterite is 150 mm, which is what? 0.15. And then we'll now what? Close. Doing this is measures for the import for the laterite filling for what? This first room here, right? So the next one now we're going to be looking at will be for what? This room at this side, which is room 2. So let me use my marker and what? Demarcate that section. So as you can see, I've used my red marker to what? Demarcate the room. So we need to find the what? In-to-in dimension from this point to what? This point. And we also have to find the in-to-in dimension from this point to this point. So we're going to be using this side as our length and this side as our what? Width, as we used in our first room. So now how do we determine our length side? As you can see, we're given 3 dimension, 4 dimension actually, from the center point of this column down to the center point of this column. We're given this dimension, this dimension, this dimension, and what? This dimension. So to get the total length of the dimension from this center point down to this center point, we have to add everything together. And after we add everything together, it means that we've gotten the dimension from this center point down to this what? Center point. So now we're not going to be minusing what? The half of the thickness of this column and the half of the thickness of what? This column. So similarly, we are going to be doing the same thing for what? The width side. To get the total distance from this point, which is this call out here, down to call out C, we're given what? 2 dimensions, 3943 and what? 637. So we have to add the 2 of them what? Together. After adding the 2 of them together, we'll now minus what? Half of the thickness of this column and half of the thickness of what? This column. Whatever we have, we're going to be having the what? In-to-in dimension of the what? Width side. So with that, we can now what? Measure. our length side, how do we get our length side? Like I said, we have to add this dimension, this dimension, this dimension, and what's this dimension. So 1096 plus 944 plus 2545 plus 452. When you add everything together, what are we going to be having? Is equal to what? 5037. So it means that the dimension from this center point to this center point is what? 5037. So we have to minus what? Half of the thickness of this column from both sides. So we'll now less what? 2 by half of what? 230. So which is going to give me what? 230. So when you do the maths, 5037 minus 230 is equal to what? 4807. So 4807 is the what? Distance for the what? End-to-end dimension for this long side. So we'll have to do the same thing for the width side. So to determine the width, like I said, you have to what? Add this dimension and this dimension together. So we'll now write the first dimension is what? 3943. So the width side (3,943), and then we'll now add this smaller part, which is 637 plus 637, and what are we going to have? Is equal to what? 4580. So it means that the dimension from this center point down to this center point is what? 4580. So we're going to be minusing half of the column from this side and half of the column from this side. So it will be what? Less 2 by half of what? 230, and that's going to be equals to what? 230. And then 4580 minus 230 is equal to what? 4350. So this is the width for the what? Room 2. And now we'll what? Measure. So the length side is what? 5037, which is what? 5.04. The width side is what? 4350, which is what? 4.35. And what's the thickness of our laterite? 150 mm, which is 0.15. And then we will close. Sorry, this is not supposed to be 5.04. Don't forget, we less 2 by half of 230 from it. So this is supposed to be the what? Actual length, 4807. So this is approximately what? 4.81. So we'll change this to 4.81. So to get our room 3, the length for room 3, which is this side here, is the same as what? This length here, because they are falling within the same what? Point between call out 1 and what? Call out 3 prime. So it means that whatever we've calculated from here to here is the same thing as what we will have from here to this point. So there will be no need calculating this side because we've already calculated that before, and we're given 4807. However, for this side, we are given two dimensions, 4033 and what? 560. So we'll have to add those two parameters together to give us the center to center dimension from this point down to call out what? F. After that, we're now going to be lessen what? Half of the thickness of this column and half of the thickness of what? This column. So our length, we know that our length is equal to what? 4807. And then our width, we have what? two dimensions, 4000 and what 33 and 500 and what 16. So we'll add the two of them together, equal to what 4500 and what 93. So we'll now less what 2 by half of what 230, and that's going to be equals to what 230, and then we close. 4593 minus 230 is equal to what 4363. So it means that the dimension for inside the into dimension from this point down to this point is what 4363. So we'll now what book. So the length is what 4.59, which is this one converted to meters, and then the width is what 4.36, and then our thickness of 150 is what 0.15, and then we'll now what close. So doing this, we measured for what room 3. So the next room we're going to be looking at will be for what this particular room here. So I'm going to be using my red marker to what demarcate this section. So now if you look at room 4, you can see that for the length side we're given what two dimensions, 1543 and 452. So we're going to be adding them together to get the distance from this point down to call out 4. After we get that, we're going to less half of the thickness of this block work and half of the thickness of this column here. Whatever we have will be the end-to-end dimension for this short side. And similarly, for the longer side here, you know that we've already calculated this part when we're measuring for the width side of our room 1. So it means that whatever we have here as the width side of our room 1 will be the same thing as what we have here, because it is within call out what A and what C. So what we'll just do, instead of recalculating, we'll just bring this back. So let's go into the measurement. So as you can see, for room 4, the length is, to find the length, we had two dimensions, 1543 plus 452. We'll have what 1995. Then we'll now less 2 by half of 230, which is going to give us what 230. And when we do the math, we're having 1765 for the length side, and for the width side we'll just bring back our what 3778 as we've calculated in our room 1. So after this, we will now what book. So the length is what 1.995, which is approximately what 2 meters, and then 3.778, which is approximately what 3.78, and by what thickness of our laterite, which is what 0.15. With this, we've measured for our what volume of laterite for room 4. So how do we measure for what this long side here? Now you can see that for our length side, which is this short side, we were given what the dimension from call out 3 prime to call out 4 as 1543. So now since it means that the dimension from this center point down to this center point is 1543. So we're going to be lessing what half of the thickness of this column here and half of the thickness of this what column here. Whatever we have will be the end-to-end dimension for what the length side of this what room. However, for the longer side, if you trace the call out up, you see that this is call out C, and if you trace the call out up, you see that this is call out what F. So between call out C and F, we're given how many dimensions? 4. This dimension, this dimension, this dimension, and what this dimension. So we have to add everything up. When we add everything up, whatever we have will be the dimension from call out C towards F. So we have to less what half of the thickness of this block work here and half of the thickness of this block work here. Whatever we have will be the end-to-end dimension for this long side. So now with that, we can now what measure. So for room 5, we were told that the length from call out 3 prime to call out 4 is 1543, which is this. And I said we're going to less what half of the thickness of the what column from both sides, so which is 2 by half of what 230, and that will give us what 230. When you do the math, you'll be having 1313. So for the width side, which is the longer side, we were given 4 dimensions: 3,943, 637, 560, and 4,033. So when you add everything together, you're going to be having 9,173. And like I said, you will now less half of the thickness of this block work here from both sides to get the in-to-in dimension of the longer side. So you will now less 2 by half of 230, and that will give us 230. So when you minus 230 from 9,173, you are going to be having 8,943. So now with this, we will now book. Our length side is 1,313, which is 1.31, which is what we did here. Our width side is 8,943, which is 8.94 meters, and that's what we had here. And the thickness for our laterite is 0.15, and that is what we had here. So with this, we measured for our room 5. The next room we're going to be looking at is our room 6. So for room 6, as you can see, I have demarcated the partition. So now for the length side, which is this shorter side, we are given from callout 4 down to this point as 2,075. So as usual, we're going to be lessing half of the thickness of this column and half of the thickness of this block work. Whatever we have will be the in-to-in dimension from this point down to this point. However, for the in-to-in dimension for this length side, it will be the same as the in-to-in dimension for the width side of our room 4, because we've already calculated this point from here to here in our room 4, and as you can see, it is the same thing as from here to here in our room 6. So now with that, we'll now measure starting from the length side. So the length side, they say that the dimension from callout 4 to this point is 2,075. So now let's 2 by half of 230, which is equal to 230, and then we'll close. 2,075 minus 230 is equal to 1,845. So this is the dimension for the in-to-in dimension for the left side. And as for the width side, what have we calculated as the width for our room 4? For our room 4, we calculated the width as 3,778. So now that we've gotten our length and our width, we are going to book. So the length is 1.85 when you convert this to meters, and then the width will be 3.78 when you convert this to meters, and the thickness of the laterite is 0.15, and then you close. Doing this, you measure for your laterite filling for room 6. So the next room we're going to be looking at will be room 7. And as you can see, this big side here is room 7. So let me use my red marker and make it visible. So as you can see, this is the outline of room 7. And to start with our length side, which is this side, you can see that if you trace our callouts from the midpoint, we have callout 4, and if you trace this point down, we have callout 5. And between callout 4 and 5, we're given 2 dimensions, 2,484 and 2,075. So now we need to determine what is the distance from callout 4 to 5. To do that, we have to add these 2 dimensions together. So now, after adding these 2 dimensions together, whatever you have will be the dimension from callout 4 to 5. So we'll now have to minus half of the thickness of this block work here and half of the thickness of this column here. whatever we have will be the end-to-end dimension from this point down towards this point. And similarly, to get the length, if you trace the columns from this midpoint down, this is call out C, and if you trace the columns from this point down, this is call out D. And the dimension from call out C to this was 3,943. So you will now be lessing what? Half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of this column. Whatever you have will be the end-to-end dimension for the width side for room 7. So now with that, we'll now do the math. So for the length side, we're given two dimensions, 2,484 and 2,075. So we'll add the two of them together. 2,484 plus 2,075 is equal to what? 4,559. So we'll now less what? Half of the thickness of this column and half of the thickness of this what? Block work. So which is what? 2 by half of what? 230. I've already explained what this 2 by half of 230. It means what? The 2 is for what? These two sides, this side and what? This side. The half is that we are going to be halving the thickness of this side and the thickness of this side, and the 230 is what? The dimension of the what? Thickness of the what? Both the block work and the what? Column at that point. That is why it's 2 by half of what? 230. And when you do the math, it's going to give you what? 230. So 4,559 minus 230 is equal to what? 4,329. Right? So this is our what? Length. So the next one we're going to be looking at will be our what? Width. And to get our width, we've traced our call out to C and what? D, and we're given the dimension of 3,943. So we'll have to minus what? Half of the thickness of this block work and half of the thickness of this what? Column. So let's do the math. 3,943 will now less what? 2 by half of what? 230. And that is going to be equal to what? 230. And then we'll close. 3,943 minus 230 is equal to what? 3,713. So we've gotten our length and we've gotten our what? Width. So we'll now what? Record. Our length is what? 4,329, which is what? 4.33, and our width is what? 3,715, which is what? 3.71, and the thickness is what? 0.15, and we'll now what? Close. So doing this, we measure for what? Room 7. Our next room is going to be what? Room 8, which is this, the biggest room here, which is this one. So I'm going to be using my red marker to what? Outline it. So for room 8, we are going to be starting with the length side, which is this side here. And to get the length side, if you trace our call out, it traces to what? Call out 4. And this side traces to call out what? 6. And between call out 4 and 6, how many dimensions were we given? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have to add these 4 dimensions together. Whatever we have will be the dimension from call out 4 down to call out 6. Then we have to less half of the thickness of this column here and half of the thickness of this column here. When we do that, whatever we have is going to be the end-to-end dimension from this point down to this point. And similarly for the width side, if we trace our call out, we trace it to call out F, and if we trace our call out here, we trace it to call out what? D. So now the dimensions in between D and F, we're given 3 dimensions, this, and what? This. So we have to add these 3 dimensions together to get the total dimension from call out D to F. So since we've gotten whatever we have will now be the dimension from this point down towards this point. we'll now less half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of what? This column. And whatever we have will now be the dimension in for this what? Width side of the room. So with that, we can now what? Measure. So for the length side, we were given what? 4 dimensions. The first one is what? 2075. The second one is what? 2484. The third one is what? 768. And the last one is what? 1178. So add all these 4 dimensions together. 2075 plus 2484 plus 768 plus 1178 is equal to what? 6505. So it means that what? The dimension from callout 4 down to callout 6 is 6505. So we have to minus what? Half of the thickness of this column and half of the thickness of what? This column. So we'll now less 2 by half of what? 230, which is going to be equal to what? 230. So 6505 minus 230 is equal to what? 6275. So this is what the dimension for the in-to-in of our length side. The in-to-in from this point down to this point. So the next thing we now have to do is to get the in-to-in dimension for our width side. So for the width side, we're given 3 dimensions. So the first dimension is what? 4033. Second dimension is what? 560. And the last dimension is what? 637. So when you add everything together, 4033 plus 560 plus 637 is going to be equal to what? 5230. So it means that the dimension from callout D to A is what? 5230. So we're not going to be lessing what? Half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of what? This column here. So which is going to be what? 2 by half of what? 230 less, which is going to give me what? 230. When you do the math, you're going to be having what? 5,000. And then you now book. So for our length side, we've gotten our length side to be what? 6275. So we'll now what? Book, which is what? 6.28. And our width side is what? 5,000, which is what? 5.00. And the thickness is 150, which is what? 0.15. And then we will now what? Close. So doing this, we've measured for what? Room 8. So the next one now we're going to be looking at will be what? Room 9, which is what? This room here. So I'm going to be using my red pen to what? Outline it so that it can be visible. So as you can see, this is what? Room 9. And for room 9, we have to get the length side and the width side. So starting from the length side, if you trace the callout, we have callout 5, and if you trace this callout, we have callout 6. So in between callout 5 and 6, we're given 2 dimensions, 768 and 1178. So we have to add these 2 together to get the total distance from callout 5 to callout what? 6. Whatever we have, we will now less what? Half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of what? This column here. So whatever we get will be the in-to-in distance from this point down to this point. So for the width side, if you look at this, the in-to-in dimension from this point to this point is the same as the in-to-in dimension from this point to this point, and this is our room what? 7. So it means that the width side for this room 9 will be the same thing as the distance for the width for this room 7. So instead of recalculating, just go and pick the width of room 7 and bring it down here. So now we'll what? Calculate. So for room 9, we are going to be starting with what? The length side. So for the length side, we had 2 dimensions, so we have to add it up. So the first one was 768, and the second one was 1178, and then we close. 768 plus 1178 is equal to what? 1946. So it means that the dimension from this center point down to this center point is 1946. So we'll now less half of the thickness of this block work and half of the thickness of this column. So we'll now less 2 by half of 230, and that's going to be equals to 230, and then we close. 1946 minus 230 is equal to 1716. So this is this for the length side, and as for the width side, I told you should go to your room 7 and pick the width because they are the same thing, and we have 3713 as the width for room 7. So you bring it back here, 3713. So before we book, I just want you to know that you have to first understand the drawing. After understanding the drawing, you now need to understand the principle of what I'm doing here, because drawings change. It is by understanding this principle that you'll be able to use your knowledge of the drawing that is given to you to measure. So please take conversance with what I'm doing here, because things can change depending on the drawing that they're given to you. So now we can now book. Our length is 1946, which is 1.95. Our width is 3713, which is 3.71, and the thickness of our laterite is 150, which is 0.15, and then we'll now close. Doing this, we've measured for room 9. So the next one we're going to be looking at is room 10. And where is our room 10? This is our room 10. So I'm going to be using my marker to highlight it. So for room 10, we're going to be starting with our length, and the length will be the long side, which is this point. So if you treat this collar, we are stopping at this point, and if you treat this collar, is at collar 6. So in between this collar and collar 6, we're given 3 dimensions: this one, and this one. So you have to add everything together to get the total distance from this collar down to collar 6, and after that we'll now minus half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of this column, where we minus that whatever we have will be the in-to-in dimension for this wall from here to here. And similarly for the width side, whatever we have here would be the same thing as what we have for this wall here, because they are in between columns A and C. So what you just do is to go and look for the dimension for this point that you've calculated, and then bring it back to this point here, so that you will not waste your time. So now, and the dimension we've calculated here is 3778. So if from here to here is 3778, it means that from here to here will be the same thing. So now we'll start with room 10. So for room 10, we'll start with the length side, and the length side we have 3 dimensions: 2484, 768, 1178. So we have to add these three parameters together. 2484 plus 768 plus 1178 is equal to what? 4430. So now it means that the dimension from what this point, this call out here down to call out 6 is what? 4430. So we're going to be lessing the half of the thickness of this wall and half of the thickness of what? This column. So it will now become what? Less 2 by half of what? 230, and that's going to be equals to what? 230, and then we close. So 4430 minus 230 is equal to what? 4200. So this is our length, and our width, we've calculated our width as what? 3778 previously. So now with this we can now what? Measure. So our length is what? 4.43. Our width is what? 3.78, and the thickness of the lateral is what? 0.15. And then you now what? Close. So doing this, you measure for the what? Quantity of what? Lateral for what? Room 10. So the last one is what? For room 11. Let me use my red biro to outline what? The last room. So for room 11, we're going to be starting with the length side. And the length side, if you trace the call out, is what? Call out 6. And if you trace this other side, is what? Call out 7. The distance between call out 6 and 7 is what? 1920. So now we're not going to be lessing what? Half of the thickness of what? This column. And as you can see, it's column type 5. And I said that column type 5 is what? 300 by what? 300 in our drawing. So now if you look at this drawing, you can see this is what? Column type 5. And as you can see, the dimension is what? 300 by what? 300. And similarly, this column here is column type what? 1, which is what? 230 by what? 230. Remember in the drawing, from column type 1 to 4 is what? 230 by 230. Column type 5 is what? 300 by 300. And column type 6 is what? 230 by 381. Now, since the beginning to the end, we've been doing the thickness of the column to be 230 by 230, because if you check the drawing, right, all the columns that we've done for these rooms were all from column type 1 down to column type 4. However, in this case, the wall is in between what? A column type 5 and a column type 1, having different dimensions. So now we have to minus what? Half of the thickness of column type 5 and half of the thickness of what? Column type 1. I don't know if that makes sense. So now we're not going to what? Move to the what? Width side. So for the width side, if you trace the dimension, we have call out what? C, and if you trace the dimension, we have call out E. So we have to find the dimension from call out C to E, and we're given 3 dimensions. This dimension, and what? This dimension. So we have to add the 3 dimensions together. Whatever we get will be the dimension from call out C to E. So now if you see, this particular call out is in between what? 2 column type 5. Column type 5 here and column type 5 here. So we're going to be lessing what? Half of column type 5 from what? Both sides. Whatever we have will be the end-to-end dimension for the width side of this what? Room. So now with this we can now what? Measure. So the first one, which is what? The length side, between colors 6 and 7 we had 1920. So the length side we had 1920. So we're going to be lessing what? This first half, which is what? Half of what? 230. So half of 230 is equal to what? 115. And similarly, we're going to be lessing what? Half of what? 300 for column type 5. So less half of what? 300, which is what? 150. So 1920 minus 115 minus 150 is equal to what? 1655. So this is what? The length for what? Room 11. So now we'll now move to the what? Width. So for the width side, we had 3 dimensions: 3943, 637, and what? 560. So when you add everything together, 3943 plus 637 plus 560 is equal to what? 5140. So it means that the dimensions of color C to E is 5140, and it is in between 2 column type what? 5. So we're going to be lessing half of column type 5 from this side and half of column type 5 from this other side. So we'll now less what? 2 by half of what? 300, and that's going to be equal to what? 300, and then we close. 5140 minus 300 is equal to what? 4840. So this is our what? Width. So now with this, you can now what? Book. So our length is was 1655, which is what? 1.66. Our width is what? 4840, which is what? 4.84, and the thickness is what? 0.15, and we'll now what? Close. Doing this, we've measured for what? All the volume of what? Laterite for the individual rooms inside this foundation, right? So now what we are going to be doing now is that we're going to be finding the squaring column and adding everything together. So the first one now will be for room 1. 4.36 times 3.78 times 0.15 is equal to what? 2.47 cubic meter. For room 2, 4.81 times 4.35 times 0.15 is equal to what? 3.14 cubic meter. For room 3, 4.59 times 4.36 times 0.15 is equal to what? 3.001, which is 3.00 cubic meters. For room 4, 2.00 times 3.78 times 0.15 is equal to what? 1.13. For room 5, 1.31 times 8.94 times 0.15 is equal to what? 1.76. For room 6, 1.85 times 3.78 times 0.15 is equal to what? 1.05. For room 7, 4.33 times 3.71 times 0.15 is equal to what? 2.409, which is 2.41. For room 8, 6.28 times 5.00 times 0.15 is equal to what? 4.71. For room 9, 1.95 times 3.71 times 0.15 is equal to what? 1.085, which is 1.09. For room 10, 4.43 times 3.78 times 0.15 is equal to what? 2.511, which is 2.51. And then for the last one, room 11, 1.66 times 4.84 times 0.15 is equal to what? 1.205, which is what? 1.21. So we'll add everything together. starting from room 1, 2.47 plus 3.14 plus 3.00 plus 1.13 plus 1.76 plus 1.05 plus 2.41 plus 4.71 plus 1.09 plus 2.51 plus 1.21. That is equal to what? 24.48. And then you will now what? Describe laterite filling towards foundation. So, and then you will now what? Close. So doing this, you measured for your what? Laterite filling to the what? Foundation. So now the next thing on the list would be the hardcore filling. For the hardcore filling, the BRC mesh and other things, we'll be doing it in our next video. So if you want to have an idea of, in a case where, like I said in the beginning of the video, where the partitions for smaller sections or for smaller areas of the rooms are also excavated into the foundation, check my previous work on measurements for substructural works. It is one of my first videos. That video has what the measurements for laterite filling for situations where the walls for smaller sections like toilets, stores, and all those little things are what part of the what foundation. So do well to watch that video. I'll be putting the link under the description so that it can be easily accessible. So with this, we've come to the end of today's video, guys. I hope you derived adequate knowledge from it. Please, if you did, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel because it helps the channel grow. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.